Jean?
Michelle Jean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael Jean, the one who replaced her, she haven't signed?
No, not yet.
Oh.
And it's actually not Michelle Jean anymore either.
No, it's another guy.
David Johnston,
David
I believe
Johnson,
is his name, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so come on in.
Yeah.
Is it better for your camera if I leave the lights on?
Yeah, exactly. On.
On?
Yeah. Perfect.
So the exhibits over here would be the rest of the Bunce Island panels, but we've already seen that movie, so I need to make sure that you get all that information,
Excellent.
okay?
Yeah.
All right. Coming when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So basically, between 1783 and 1785, more than 3,000 Black Loyalists arrived in Nova Scotia as a direct result of the American Revolutionary War. During that time period, Lord Dunmore, who was one of the controllers of Britain, he was so sure that they were going to win the war against the American rebels. In fact, he was so sure of himself that he issued a proclamation that stated, any black person, man, woman, or child who wants to escape their plantation, their slave owner, come take up arms with me, fight loyally on the lines and the side of the British, and when we win, not only are we going to give you your freedom, we are going to give you land and rations. Unfortunately, though, in 1783, the British soon realized that they were not winning this war. The Americans were indeed winning, and all black persons were supposed to be returned to their slave owner. A man by the name of General Birch, and that's actually where the name Birchtown comes into play. He had a lot of pull in the American colonies at that time, and he rallied for these men and women. It wasn't morally right to send them back to their slave owners. These men and women, some of them had fought on the sides of the British since 1775. So, as long as you fought loyally on the sides of the British for at least 1 year, you were granted a certificate of freedom. This is the only certificate that has survived that we know of. This certificate actually belonged to Cato Ramsey. The original to this is at the National Archives in Halifax. So after you were given your certificate of freedom, your name was entered in a document called the Book of Negroes. There are 3 of these documents that exist worldwide. One is in England at the Public Records Office in Kew. One is in the United States at the National Archives in Washington. And one is right here in Nova Scotia at the National Archives in Halifax. So how this document worked was that the ship's name and captain was always listed first. Where they were going to, the Negro's name, age, and then description. But black women in those days were called wenches, so it could have read stout wench, young wench, old wench, sickly wench, worn out wench.
And this is from which date?
This is from 1773, I do believe. This is actually a copy of the one that's in Halifax.
Okay.
Okay, let me just check now. 1783, the 31st of July, 1783.
This is when they were arriving from the States?
Yes.
Yeah, I see.
Now, for every corresponding Black Loyalist name, the description gets a little bit more in depth, but all it tells is who the former slave owner was, when they escaped, and how long they fought loyally on the sides of the British.
Okay.
This was never an account of the person themselves. First of all, it was whether they were man or female, whether they were stout, whether they were sickly, whether, you know, they were young, old. It was never an account of them themselves. So, between April and November 1783, over 114 ships were inspected at New York Harbor, and these are the places that they sailed to in Nova Scotia, because at that time, New Brunswick was actually a part of Nova Scotia. St. John, Fort Cumberland, Annapolis, Shelburne, but at that time Shelburne was actually called Port Roseway, Port Mattoon, and Halifax. So all of the brown circles that you see, and even Birchtown and Tracadie, they were not founding communities. Black Loyalists would have dispersed from Shelburne, Annapolis, Fort Cumberland, Halifax, and they would have made their own communities. Now, when the Black Loyalists arrived in Shelburne, Shelburne was just being established by white Loyalists, and Shelburne was not ready for an influx of people. But nevertheless, the white Loyalists were not ready for an influx of black people. They did not want the Black Loyalists to integrate with their community. They were told they could come out here to this piece of land. Although this was not their land allotments, they could basically squat here until the British government figured out what they were going to do with them. They were told that land was great for cultivation, and as you can see when I take you outside, Birchtown is not good for cultivation. Now, when the Black Loyalists arrived in Birchtown, they didn't have proper provisions to build a house. They hadn't received any rations from the British government. So what happened was they actually built a temporary makeshift house called a pit house. I have a replica of that pit house, which I will show you once we get outside. Now, yes, they were able to build a shelter, but unfortunately, they needed a way to survive. They needed to eat. They needed to raise their families. So what happened was the Black Loyalists of Birchtown indentured themselves to the white Loyalists of Shelburne. So the only difference between an indentured slave and a slave is that an indentured slave goes into it willingly, whereas a slave, you're taken against your will into captivity and you're sold. But because the white Loyalists of Shelburne did not believe that the Black Loyalists were of an equal value, they were actually paid a lesser rate for doing the exact same job. So if you were a white Loyalist of Shelburne, it was to your advantage to hire a Black Loyalist because you got the same work done for a fraction of the cost. But the men and women from Birchtown, they had to walk from Birchtown to Shelburne every day to go to work. They didn't have a nice dirt road to walk on. They actually had to walk through the woods, and sometimes they would have had to truck along the shoreline to get to work every day. Now, in 1784, when a group of disbanded white soldiers had returned home from the American Revolutionary War, between the white Loyalists and the Black Loyalists, jobs were very scarce in Shelburne. But these soldiers believed that the Black Loyalists were taking work away from the white Loyalists. Shelburne and Birchtown became the spot of Canada's largest race riot ever. It lasted for more than 20 days. But once again, the Black Loyalists, they picked themselves up, they rebuilt their pit houses, they would have salvaged what belongings they could have, and they walked back and forth every day to go to work to be able to survive and feed their families. Now, after living here for, a few years, and they still hadn't received their land allotments, a man by the name of Thomas Peters, he actually wrote a letter to the British government and to the Queen. Life here in Birchtown was not at all what they expected it to be. They had fought such a hot war in the United States, but when they arrived here in Birchtown, they were not mentally or physically ready for the harsh, cold climates. So what the British government very so graciously did was they actually gave the Black Loyalists land allotments 15 kilometers from Birchtown in an area that we now call Beaver Dam. But there was a stipulation. In order for the men and women to be able to claim the rights to their land, within 1 year they had to do the following. They had to have a dwelling on that piece of land, and one of these, an orchard, garden, or livestock. Now let's take this scenario. We get up every morning, we walk to Shelburne to go to work. We work all day long. We walk home another 7 kilometers. When we come home, there's still everyday family life that has to go on. Suppers have to be cooked, children have to be tended to. There's still everyday family life that goes on. And then to walk another 15 kilometers one way, the British government set them up to fail. Less than 1/3 of Birchtown's population who stayed here ever got to claim the rights to their land. My family was not one of those families. Now, in 1792, a man by the name of John Clarkson, he was sent underneath the direction of the British government, and he was sent here with the Sierra Léone Company. And he was sent, I guess you could say, to make up for a lot of the wrongdoing that the British government had instilled on these men and women. So what happened was the exodus to Sierra Leone. And if you wanted to, you could go back home to Africa and you could finally be free. Well, Nova Scotia lost approximately 1,200 men and women to this exodus to Sierra Leone. This is the list of all of the men and women who left to go back to Africa. And over here, I have the very first land grant in Africa, 1792. All of the orange dots that you see here would have been Black Loyalists who left from Birchtown. All of the other dots would have been Black Loyalists who left from the other surrounding areas in Nova Scotia. Now, when the Black Loyalists arrived in Sierra Leone, yes?
You have 500 and...
No, that's their land allotments, 484. Okay. So you would go over here and you would look for land allotment 484.
And you say how many of them left?
Approximately 1,200 left from Nova Scotia.
12, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
1,000. Yeah.
190, something like
1,109, yes. Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when the Black Loyalists arrived into Freetown, so this is a picture that is supposed to depict the 15 ships that disembarked on the Adventure. So of the,
to Sierra Leone.
Yes. Of the 15 ships, there was one medical ship, which you probably read in the Clarkson's mission, that was strategically placed in the center. Excellent. If anybody from the other surrounding ships were sick, they would be quarantined to this ship.
And this is why 65 died, and the doctor called Dr. Bell passed away in the ship, and he is the only one that was able to get the funeral in Freetown. All the other 65 Black who died, they didn't get a funeral ceremony.
So these men and women are arriving underneath the direction of the British government. The year is 1792.
Yeah.
Now these men and women, they are free. They're arriving back home in Africa. But slavery was not abolished until 1807. So over here is a major slave trading ship that is exiling Africans away from their homes, their families, communities, villages. There wasn't a darn thing these men and women could do about it. Now, when the Black Loyalists arrived into Sierra Leone, yes, they were free, and yes, they had their land. But unfortunately, they didn't have proper provisions to make a dwelling. A lot of them arrived one more time with the clothes they had on their back. So historian Joseph Apala, who was here my very first summer, because I had always wondered what had happened to these Black men and women who left to go on to Africa. These men and women who participated in the exodus to Sierra Leone actually had a hand in working on Bunce Island. They actually indentured themselves to the white slave owners of Bunce Island because they needed a job. And what historian Joseph Apala told me was just before this fleet arrived into Sierra Leone, the white slave traders, they would go around to the other African kings and they would tell these African kings that these men and women were not black because they were not born in Africa. These men and women actually would have been born on plantations, and yes, they were black. They were told that they didn't speak the mother tongue, and they were also told that if you try to barter and help them in any sort of way, that you and your family could be taken into captivity.
Okay, because you know, with you